He said it the way someone might mention the weather. Flat. Casual. Like what he was asking me wasn't the most unreasonable thing I had heard in 63 years of living. My son-in-law stood in the doorway of my own kitchen, the kitchen I had refinished in 2019, the kitchen where I had made Christmas dinner for 31 years, and he told me that if I didn't sign over my RRSP to cover his business debt, I should start thinking about where else I was going to live. I remember I was holding a dish towel. I remember I set it down very carefully on the counter, the way you set something down when you're trying not to throw it. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. He took that as an opening. My name is Audrey. I am 63 years old. I lived in a 3-bedroom house in Guelph, Ontario, the house my late husband Warren and I bought in 1991, when the market was sane and mortgage rates were something a nurse and a high school shop teacher could actually manage. We raised our daughter Petra there. We built a garden there. Warren died there, in the bedroom at the end of the hall on a Tuesday morning in February, with snow falling outside the window and my hand in his. After Warren passed, I did what I imagine most women in my position do. I kept going. I kept the house. I kept the garden. I worked another 4 years before I retired, and when I retired I had my pension, my RRSP, the house paid off, and what I thought was a good sense of what the rest of my life was going to look like. Quiet mostly. Manageable. Mine. Petra had been living in Calgary with her husband Damon for about 6 years by then. Damon ran a renovation contracting business, or so I understood. He was pleasant enough when he needed to be, the kind of man who tells good stories at dinner and then somehow never helps clean up after. I had never fully warmed to him, but I told myself that was my own fault. Petra loved him, Petra was happy. That was what mattered. Then in the spring of 2 years ago, Petra called me crying. The business was in trouble, she said, real trouble. Damon had taken out loans, she didn't know how many, or from how many places, and the numbers she was telling me were not renovation business numbers. They were numbers that made me sit down on the edge of my bed and press the phone hard against my ear like I hadn't heard correctly, and needed to check again. $240,000. That was the figure she gave me. $240,000 spread across a line of credit, 2 business loans, and she said this quietly, like she was ashamed, a second mortgage on their Calgary condo. She wasn't asking me for anything, she said. She just needed to tell someone. I believed her. I shouldn't have. 3 weeks later, she called again. This time Damon was on the line too. He did most of the talking. He said they had spoken to a financial advisor. He used the phrase financial advisor the way people use it when they want something to sound more official than it is. And they had worked out that if they could consolidate the debt, they could save the business and get their heads above water. The consolidation required collateral. He said my name. He said, Audrey, we were thinking if you were willing to co-sign. I said no. There was a pause. Then Petra said, Mum, it's not a big ask. I thought about that for a long time afterward. $240,000. My RRSP, the whole of it, was $308,000. I had been putting money in there since I was 26 years old. Every year, every paycheck, even the years when Warren was between jobs, even the years when the furnace needed replacing or Petra needed braces. I had put money into that account with the faithful, unglamorous consistency of a woman who understood that no one was coming to save her in old age if she didn't save herself first. Not a big ask. I said no again. I said it calmly. I said I was sorry they were in this situation, and I hoped they could find a solution, but I was not able to co-sign anything. Damon said, okay, like it wasn't over, like he was just filing that answer somewhere, and he'd come back to it. That was April. In June, Petra called to say that the Calgary condo had sold. They had to sell it to pay some of the debt, and they were going to need to find somewhere to stay while they got back on their feet. She asked if they could come to Guelph. She asked if they could stay with me. I want to be very clear about something. I said yes because she was my daughter. I said yes because I had a guest room and a finished basement, and I genuinely thought that we were talking about a few months. I thought I was helping. I thought that was what a mother did. They arrived on a Thursday with a moving truck. A full moving truck. Furniture. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. A dog I didn't know they had, a large yellow lab who immediately claimed the couch I had reupholstered 2 summers ago. I stood on the driveway and watched them unload, and I felt the first real flicker of something I didn't want to name yet. The first month wasn't terrible. Damon was out a lot, supposedly working on rebuilding the business remotely. Petra cooked sometimes. We watched movies in the evening. The dog, whose name was Chester, turned out to be very sweet, and I found that I didn't mind him at all. It was the small things that started first. Petra rearranging my kitchen cupboards because she said the layout didn't make sense. Damon using my parking spot without asking and leaving me to park on the street. The thermostat being turned up 4 degrees every night because Petra felt cold, even though I've kept this house at the same temperature for 15 years, and I'm the one paying the utility bills. I mentioned the parking spot once. Petra said, "Mom, it's not a big deal." That phrase again. I mentioned the thermostat once. Damon looked at me with an expression I can only describe as patient. The way a person looks at someone who is being unreasonable but doesn't want to say so directly. I stopped mentioning things. By October I had moved most of my mornings to the back garden just to have a space that felt like mine. I would take my coffee out there even when it was cold, which in Guelph in October is genuinely cold, and I would sit wrapped in Warren's old barn coat and watch the light come up over the neighbor's fence and try to remember what my house had felt like before. Damon found a new business partner in November. I heard about this second-hand from Petra in the same casual way you might hear about someone changing their phone plan. The new partner was apparently going to help him restructure, get new contracts, get things moving again. This was good news. I thought it meant they would be leaving soon. What it actually meant was that Damon needed capital again. I came home from my Tuesday aquafit class at the River Run Center to find Damon sitting at my kitchen table with what I can only describe as paperwork energy. There was a folder. There was a pen. He had made coffee, which he never did, and he offered me a cup, which he also never did. I sat down. He said that the new venture was solid. He said the numbers made sense. He said that the opportunity had a short window, and that to move on it he needed to be able to show liquid assets. He said that if I was willing to allow him to list my RRSP as collateral, not transfer it, just list it, he could secure the partnership agreement and be fully operational by spring. He said they would be out of my hair by May. He said it like that. Out of my hair. I asked him what would happen if the venture didn't work out. He said that wasn't going to happen. I said, but if it did? He said, "Audrey, I need you to trust me here." I had trusted him with my daughter for 6 years. I had trusted him when he said the business was solid before the $240,000. I had trusted him when he said they just needed a few months before the moving truck. I said no. That was when the temperature in the room changed. He leaned back in his chair. He said slowly that he had been doing some thinking. He said that the house was worth quite a bit, Guelph property values being what they were, and that a woman my age, living alone, probably didn't need 3 bedrooms. He said that Petra had mentioned years ago that Warren and I had always intended to leave the house to her. He said he didn't know what my arrangements looked like, but it seemed like there might be a conversation to have there. I sat very still. He said that naturally he and Petra would want me to be taken care of. He said there were very nice seniors' residences in Guelph, and he had actually looked a few up. He said this gently, like it was a kindness. I picked up my coffee. I drank it. I set the cup down. I said I was going to have a lie down, and we could talk more later. He said, of course. He was still smiling. I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of my bed, in the same spot where I had sat when Petra first called me, crying about the debt, and I thought about Warren. I thought about what he would have said. Warren was not a loud man, not a confrontational man, but he had a very clear sense of what was right, and when something crossed that line he became very, very quiet. The quieter he got, the more certain he was. I became very quiet. I want to explain something about RRSP accounts and wills in Ontario, because I think it matters. An RRSP with a named beneficiary does not go through your estate. It goes directly to the person named. Mine had been updated after Warren died. I had named Petra because she was my daughter, because I hadn't yet learned what I was in the process of learning. The will was different. The house was in the will. My lawyer's name was on a card in my desk drawer, a woman named Jeanette, whom I had seen twice, once when I first made the will, and once when I updated it after Warren's death. She had an office on Woolwich Street. She was thorough, and she did not waste time. The following morning I called Jeanette. I didn't tell Petra or Damon I was going. I said I was going to the pharmacy and the grocery store, which I also did, so it wasn't entirely untrue. I sat in Jeanette's office for 90 minutes. She listened to everything. She didn't react visibly to any of it, which I have come to understand is what you want in a lawyer. She asked questions. She took notes. When I left, I had a list of things to do, and I had a new understanding of exactly what I did and did not have control over. The month after that, I did each thing on the list. I did them quietly, one at a time, the way you pack a bag when you've already decided you're leaving. I updated the beneficiary on my RRSP. I had the will revised. I had a conversation with my financial advisor, a real one, a woman I had been working with for 8 years, about converting a portion of my RRSP to a RIF and adjusting the payout structure in a way that would make it considerably less useful as collateral for anyone else's debts. I also called my brother-in-law, Warren's younger brother, who lives in Barrie and who has always been fond of me in an uncomplicated, dependable way. I explained the situation. He didn't say much. He said, "Audrey, if you need to, you come here." That was all. But I held on to it. Christmas was strange. Petra made her father's stuffing recipe, which I had taught her when she was 16, and for a moment at the table I felt so much love for her, it was almost disorienting. She was still my daughter. She was still the child I had rocked through fevers and driven to every piano lesson and held in a hospital room in Calgary when she miscarried the baby that would have been my first grandchild. None of that had changed. What had changed was that she had stopped seeing me. I don't mean literally. I mean she had stopped seeing me as a person with her own life and her own fears and her own 33 years of careful planning. She saw me as a resource. I'm not sure when that happened, and I'm not sure whether Damon had planted that seed gradually or whether she had arrived at it on her own, and I am not sure it matters. In January, Damon asked me again. This time he had printed materials. He had a 1-page summary of the new venture, solar installation subcontracting apparently, which was apparently booming in Ontario, and a breakdown of projected returns. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same folder energy, and he walked me through it like a presentation. I let him finish. I said no. He said, "Audrey, I have to be honest with you. Petra and I can't keep living like this." I thought about that sentence for a moment. I thought about the fact that they were living in my house. I thought about the moving truck, and Chester on my reupholstered couch, and my parking spot, and the thermostat, and the $240,000 that I had had nothing to do with. I thought about the fact that I had said yes in June because she was my daughter, and I had a guest room. I said, "I think you're right." He looked surprised. He thought I was agreeing with him. I said, "I've been thinking the same thing, actually. I don't think this arrangement is working." I said it very calmly. "I think we need to talk about a timeline for you and Petra to find your own place." His face did something complicated. He said that wasn't what he meant. He said he meant that they couldn't keep operating without a financial resolution. He said some other things. his voice getting less measured as he went, and then he said, and this is the sentence I will carry with me for a long time. He said that I should think about whether I really wanted to make things difficult for my only daughter. I said I would think about it. I thought about it that night, and the night after. On the third night I called my brother-in-law in Barry, and I said, I think I need to take you up on that offer. I want to be careful about how I describe the next part, because I don't want it to sound dramatic when the truth is that it was actually quite practical. I didn't disappear in the middle of the night. I didn't sneak out. I packed a bag on a Friday morning while Damon was out and Petra was at the gym, and I left a note on the kitchen counter that said I was going to stay with family for a while and that I would be in touch. I took my important documents. I took Warren's barn coat. I took the small framed photo from my nightstand, the one of Warren and me on the dock at my cousin's lake, 1988. Both of us 25 and slightly sunburned and very happy. I left Chester's water bowl full. I drove to Barry. My brother-in-law and his wife had the guest room ready. They fed me spaghetti that night and didn't ask too many questions, and I slept for 11 hours, which I had not done since before the moving truck. The calls from Petra started the next morning. I let them go to voicemail. I texted her to say I was safe and I would call when I was ready. She called 4 more times. Damon called once, which told me something. I called Petra back on the third day. She was upset, genuinely, I think, in a way that was separate from Damon's agenda, and we talked for a long time. I told her I loved her. I told her that had never been in question. I told her that I was not going to co-sign anything. I was not going to list my assets as anyone's collateral, and I was not going to be managed in my own home. I told her these things quietly and without anger, because I was not angry anymore. I had moved past anger somewhere around January. She cried. I let her cry. I waited. Then I told her that my lawyer had sent a registered letter to the house that week. They would have received it by now, and that she should read it carefully. I told her the will had been revised. I told her the RRSP beneficiary had been updated. I told her none of this was punitive, that she would still be provided for, but that it was no longer structured in a way that made my assets useful as leverage. There was a long silence. She said, Damon told me you had agreed. I said I didn't. Another silence. She said softly, Mom, what did he tell you exactly? That was the conversation that changed things, not fixed them. I want to be honest about that. Things between Petra and me are still tender in places, still have sore spots we move around carefully. She didn't see everything she should have seen when she should have seen it, and that hurt, and it will probably keep hurting for a while, but she heard me. Finally, in that call, she actually heard me. She and Damon separated in March. He moved out of my house. His name was not on the lease, because there was no lease, because it was my house, and she stayed on for another few weeks while she found a place of her own. Those weeks were different. We drank tea together in the mornings. She helped me plant the peas that Warren and I always put in the first week of April. We talked about small things, and sometimes bigger things, and I let her go at her own pace. The same way I had when she was 17 and figuring out something hard and needed time to get there. In May, she got a small apartment in Guelph, a 1-bedroom near the university, neat and bright and entirely hers. I helped her move in. I stood in her kitchen, tiny, nothing like mine, and I watched her hang a print she'd had since university, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hoop, I think, the careful, realistic kind. I came back to my house on a Saturday in April, just before Petra moved out. I walked through the front door and stood in the front hall for a moment, just stood there. The kitchen was a little different than I'd left it. Petra had rearranged things back to something closer to my original layout, which I thought was a small and meaningful gesture. Chester's water bowl was gone. The thermostat was at my temperature. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I looked out the window at the garden, where the peas were just beginning to thread up the trellis in thin green spirals, the way they do every spring, the way they had every spring, the way they had every spring since Warren was alive. I had not signed anything. I had not given anything away. I had not allowed myself to be managed or pressured or made to feel that my own careful life was something I owed to someone else's mistakes. I had just gone quiet and done what needed doing, and waited. Warren would have understood that. There are women in my position who feel ashamed about what happened, ashamed that their children took advantage, ashamed that it went on as long as it did, ashamed that they didn't act sooner. I understand that feeling. I had some of it too, but I made a decision, somewhere in those early months in Barry, to set it down. Shame is a weight someone else put on you, and you don't have to carry it just because they dropped it in your arms. I'm 63. I have my house, my pension, my garden. I have a daughter who is slowly finding her way back to herself, which means finding her way back to me. I have a brother-in-law in Barry who makes good spaghetti and doesn't ask too many questions. I have Warren's barn coat on the hook by the back door, and his photo on my nightstand, and the knowledge that I protected what we built together with the same quiet stubbornness he would have used himself. Love doesn't hand you the bill for someone else's debt and call it family. And when something tries to tell you otherwise, in your own kitchen, at your own table, you are allowed to set down the dish towel, say nothing, and begin making very different plans. I think about the dish towel a lot, the way I set it down on the counter, the care I took doing it. There's something I've come to understand about the way life responds to the choices we make, and it isn't mystical or complicated. It's actually quite plain. When Damon walked into my kitchen with that folder, he was counting on a particular version of me, the version that would feel guilty, feel responsible, feel like keeping the peace was worth more than keeping what was mine. He had watched me stay quiet for months, and he had mistaken my quiet for weakness. That was his first miscalculation, and it cost him everything he was trying to gain. The truth is, what looks like patience from the outside is sometimes something else entirely on the inside. It's discernment. It's a woman taking the full measure of a situation before she acts, because she has learned through decades of real life, not theory, that the right action taken at the right moment is worth more than a dozen reactions taken in anger. I was not passive in those months. I was paying attention. There is a difference, and it matters. What Damon lacked wasn't luck or capital or a better business partner. What he lacked was any real sense of right and wrong that extended beyond his own interests. He had built a life on the assumption that other people's discomfort was an acceptable price for his comfort, and for a while that worked, because the people around him, including my daughter, including me, absorbed the cost quietly. But that kind of arrangement has a natural end. It ends when the person absorbing the cost finally does the arithmetic. Petra took longer to see it than I would have liked. I won't pretend that doesn't still ache sometimes, in the way that honest things ache. But I also saw, in those weeks after Damon left, what happens when someone who has been slowly diminished starts to remember who they actually are. She started making her own coffee the way she liked it, not the way he did. Small thing. It meant everything. Intelligence isn't only what you're born with. It's also the capacity to look clearly at your own life and ask whether what you're seeing is true. Petra found that capacity again. I am proud of her for it. As for me, I think the thing I am most grateful for is that I did not wait to be rescued. Not by a lawyer, not by my brother-in-law, not by some version of events that would have sorted itself out without me having to do anything. I made the calls. I sat in Jeanette's office. I drove to Barry with Warren's barn coat in the back seat, and I did not let shame talk me out of it. That is what I want other women in my position to hold on to. The willingness to act on your own behalf, steadily and without drama, is not selfishness. It is the most honest form of self-respect there is. You built your life carefully. You are allowed to protect it the same way.